Brought to you by DK Audio.
DK Audio presents an abridged edition of Baking Across America. Written and read by me, B. Dylan Hollis. It is for good reason that cookbooks seldom venture into the territory of audiobooks. Narrating ingredients lists, quantities, and weights isn't exactly many people's idea of an engaging listen. So for your enjoyment, I've removed them. I figured one would rather the experience of hearing stories and musings over something that sounded like a study guide for an examination. We'll save the cups and teaspoons for those baking from the hard copy. What remains is a cookbook positioned rather handsomely for fine narration. This isn't because I am both the author and narrator, tickle my ego though that might, but because I've written Baking Across America so that it is precisely those stories and musings that take center stage. There are, in fact, more words on tales and anecdotes than ingredients and methods within its pages. So here I present to you a book of cookery in monaural sound, free of instructions and free of measurements. A surefire ward against destruction for those liable to set fire to their kitchens by mere proximity to an oven. Herein I'll tell you about these spangled United States, about their recipes and how and why they came about, with what I hope you'll find to be a tasteful amount of affectionate, reverent satire. We'll start off in the nation's east and begin a vintage recipe road trip across the land. Next up, in Baking Across America. Introduction. What you have here is a celebration. An ode to America's towns, cities, and countryside, brought to living color by the treasured bakes that render them extraordinary. From Little Laramie, Wyoming, to the busy avenues of Boston, Massachusetts, this book charts a sugared path through the heartland in a manner never before attempted. It's a rather grand approach to the whimsy of pies and cakes, but a deserving one if you consider that making a dessert is nothing less than crafting a smile. From all corners of these United States, we will find boundless and exciting ways to deliver just that. Baking Across America is a jubilee, a darn good old-fashioned party of dishes that is sure to rouse your neighbors to their feet and gather them around whatever table you set. I'd like you to consider every state's recipe as an endearing postcard, stamped and signed with all the charms each holds dear. Some are beautiful, others are indulgent, and a curious few defy classification. But never before has the USA felt so splendid as when explored through these 100 dishes of coast-to-coast joy. Why not take a load off and see the sights? I reckon you'll find our road ahead brimming with sweet tales and rich histories. Why Baking Across America? Too often, outsiders lambaste Americans for not leaving the confines of their nation. As a foreigner myself, from Bermuda, I took note of just how many U.S. citizens had never left the country. It wasn't until I spent my college years in the U.S. that I realized the average American has little need to trek afar, as the vibrancy offered within their borders proves enough to astound even the most travel-hungry of wayfarers. I recall the first road trip I took from Fort Collins, Colorado, to Scottsdale, Arizona. In a single day, I began on the bare high plains, ascended through towering snow-capped mountains, motored down through the pines alongside river-carved canyons, and was spat out into the sun-drenched desert of Utah. The slab-sided ochre hues of Moab slowly gave way to the dusky sands and watchful cacti of the Sonoran Desert, and I was left utterly dizzy by just how much variety I beheld in a few hundred miles. With variety in vista came variety in food. I ping-ponged from the alpine sensibilities of fondue and hot cocoa to the desert spread of chilies and prickly pear. This was a trip that made me look at my collection of yesteryear's community cookbooks in a very different light. Where I had once organized them by decade, I began reading them by state, and boy, what a wild and wacky adventure that kicked off. The buttermilk obsessions of Texas would fascinate, while the unhinged and unbridled salads of Minnesota would abhor. I thumbed through the recipes of the South with such disbelief at their tonnages of butter that I wondered if there were enough cows on earth to satisfy their bottomless appetite. From New England's Amish curiosities to California's reverence for the date, it was soon apparent to me that this country had a cavalcade of unique desserts deserving of deeper exploration. Would it not be a learned adventure to visit the epicenters of these dishes? I knew as much, and so, with my shelves of vintage cookbooks soon laid out by region and a grand road trip mapped from coast to coast, there was only one thing left to do: begin baking across America. With a title like Baking Across America, our scope was clear. We wanted to actually tour the nation with boots on the ground ambitiousness so that we might give you an earnest representation of America through her desserts. The outcome is that half of the dishes in this book were physically baked and shot on location across 19 different states and the District of Columbia. We traveled to every region in America with our suitcases packed to the brim with baking supplies, ingredients, and camera equipment, all in the name of the sweetest road trip the 21st century has so far seen. From the start, my eyes were wide open as we began our journey in Savannah, Georgia. Beneath the Spanish moss, we baked sorghum and honey pecan pie and walked Forsyth Park with peach cobbler in hand. The Southland would see us rouse the Alabama state capitol as we clambered up its marble steps with the prized Lane cake, only a day before we beckoned the mighty Mississippi with its namesake chocolate dessert. We carried on all the way to the bayous of New Orleans, where our noses were powdered by beignets and our public transportation rights were revoked as we were thrown off a trolley car for disrupting the peace with a tray of pralines. Little Rock, Omaha, and Topeka all witnessed our sugar-laden assault, and we even fended off the ghosts of Missouri's past when we made dirt cake in a 19th-century mansion on Independence Avenue in Kansas City. Baking, photographing, and tasting these desserts in their most befitting locations gave full credence to what makes them special and why the locals prefer them. I'd never fully understood the brownie until I savored it in its birthplace, right in the gilded lobby of Chicago's Palmer House, where it first graced patrons some 130 years ago. This is not to be confused with the Parker House in Massachusetts, where I carried the famed Boston cream pie through the lobby and out onto the Freedom Trail. I learned completely of Seattle's clamoring for coffee as I bobbed and weaved through Pike Place Market. I crossed Pittsburgh's many yellow bridges and waded through West Virginia's Berkeley Springs. Poolside in Palm Springs, California, and Geyserside in Yellowstone, Wyoming. We baked up to the Tetons and down to the stone effigies of our nation's capital in Washington, D.C., all in the name of upholding what makes America sweet: its people, its places, and its desserts. How to use this audiobook. This audiobook can be enjoyed in many more ways than what is typical. Sure, it is a collection of remarkable bakes and sweets that is deserving of its use as a kitchen reference, but from the outset, I wanted Baking Across America to read like an adventure that captures the essence of the United States' many marvelous locales. Stories and tales from the lower 48 and their satellites offer this book as a colorful travelogue of our journey. This nation is a tapestry of varied enthusiasms, from the hot and spicy streets of New Orleans to the haunted mansions of Missouri. This audiobook will place you right in the heart of each state's action, armed with the means to enjoy that which makes the locals proud. Northeast, New England, Mid-Atlantic. New England. Here is a land of tradition and pride, fiercely independent with history its guide. You'll find good bakes where you least expect, and roads, it appears, they often neglect. Like a brash great uncle, blunt and true, New England calls you a fool, but still bats for you. The coasts here are quaint, and inland sleep forests that wake with fall colors in the fullest chorus. Culture capital, Boston. Walking Boston, Massachusetts is a striking exercise in witnessing the birth of this nation in stone and brick. And I do recommend walking, as driving these paths that were originally paved for horse and carriage is an equally impressive exercise in not soiling one's pants. In Boston Common, where I fed pigeons and lazily circled its ponds, it's easy to forget that its grounds stand as the oldest public park in the United States, and that beneath my feet was the same soil that the British camped on before the bloody Battle of Lexington and Concord in 1775. Boston is history you can touch,
Sample complete. Ready to continue?